before the war. Oh yeah, it was kind of typical. Pittsford was a small town then. We had about 35 people in our class. It was small. And I played basketball. We didn't have any football then, but I played basketball and a lot of tennis, played lots of tennis. And I took almost all the courses because I liked school. And then I was still teaching Latin, so I took 2 or 3 years of Latin, things like that. French, they didn't have German courses. I would have taken German if they'd had it. And prepared myself pretty well to go to the U of R for 4 years there before the war. Mostly modern European history and other courses. No, mostly history. I enjoyed that. Well, I was called up before the war. We were in the war. I was first right early called up. But I was having trouble with my back at the time, and I was in a body cast, so they postponed that. And later, my back seemed to recover, and in the summer I took a job with the highway department, and the back stood up. So then I asked to be examined again in 42. In September 42, I was then taken, and I took the body cast off. I had told them I used it part of the time and sent that home, and then went off at Fort Niagara. Well, I enlisted when I could, because I wanted to. Everybody did. By the time my back was well enough to go in, there were virtually none of my friends or none of my contemporaries in the village here. It was getting to be lonesome. That was the Air Corps, which became, the Air Corps was a part of the Army. Then it was dignified with its own Air Force. So I went from the Air Corps into the Air Force. It was put on an equal basis with the Navy and the Army. I got to be a staff sergeant, which is a sergeant with one loop over the top. Yeah. Then they have master and so forth. Ultimately, you get 3 loops. I just got to be 1 loop, staff sergeant. What they called an armorer. That's an ancient phrase going back to the medieval days when the man who put the armor on was an armorer. What I did was to put the ammunition into the P-47 planes and loaded up the bombs, frag bombs or heavy bombs, or gas tanks too were loaded underneath the wings of the P-47 planes. The P-47s were great, heavy, hard, tough, single pilot planes. They were very rugged. They weighed a lot, 14,000 pounds, but they would come back with more holes in them than the lighter P-51s. So they're a very good ship. As I may have mentioned, they had a big engine, 2,000 horsepower, with water injection. They could go, for a brief period, they could go almost straight up. They were so powerful. I was in charge of one flight with 4 planes, maybe 4 planes, I guess it was. And I had 2 fellows on each plane. I was in charge of that flight, what they called a flight. I sure admired those guys. I don't think I would have had enough nerve to fly one of those things, say nothing about going into combat. They had to be skillful as well as bold, and they were bold. They were wonderful men. They were officers, and they had different quarters. I knew some of them, just passing acquaintances, buckle them in and things like that. That's all. Mm-hmm. Our ships were on the go all the time. The day was like this. You shut down at night. You had to walk a mile away from the base in case the base was bombed. You got a couple hours of sleep, then you were called out to change the bomb load because they changed their directions. And so it just kind of kept going all the day long. And when they came back, you had to reload them. And often you'd have to clean the guns, but to take them out, that was a lot of work. And or help the tinsmiths who were patching the holes in the ship. You were busy. And quite often, instead of walking back to where you were supposed to have your berth or lie on the ground, you have to get away. You just drop down right where the planes were and get your sleep there. Mostly what you did is to lie down and go to sleep. You were very tired. Yes, we did see some of those. I remember one of them. What were they called? I've forgotten now. Anyhow, one of them showed a picture of one of our planes that had come in. Let's see what happened now. Oh, it came back from a bombing expedition. One of the bombs would not release, so it was still clinging when he landed. So he landed, then the bomb decided to drop off, and it blew the back end of his plane off, except behind the pilot's armored back. So the plane stopped and dropped like this, and the pilot got out and got on the wing, dropped off, started to run away, and fainted. And we have pictures. I have pictures of that. I don't know where they are right now, but I saw that, and that was a very interesting procedure. The back end of the plane was gone, and it sat down there. So he was just got off of the wing and off and started to run away and decided he better faint. I do have a picture of that someplace. Accommodations were good. We almost always had an outfit that went ahead of us and set up tents for us. So we had the big pyramidal tents, and they were good. In northern France, it rained all the time, and everything was filled with mud. It was all muddy, except that they built sidewalks, board sidewalks for us, the advanced troops. There would be 8 of us. Let's see, no, 6 of us, I think, yeah, 6, as I recall. Yeah, these fellows were also about the same level of command that I was, and so it was a natural tent. When something happened, they'd come to our tent. All of us had to get up and go. The meals, I fortunately had a good iron tummy in those days, so C rations and K rations I enjoyed. And when we got set up in Belgium, the cooks were very good. They had lots of things to work with, so when they went out into the countryside, they could buy almost anything they wanted with our supplies, which they did. And we had good food. It reminds me, for some reason or another, of strawberries. We got on the boat in England and parked on the shore, and I went downstairs and found a bunk and went to sleep. And then later, some of my gang came and found me and woke me up. They said, "Boy, did you miss it. The Red Cross served a breakfast or dinner for us on the ship, and we had fresh strawberries. And you missed it." So I've always regretted missing those fresh strawberries. I didn't see any more of those, of course, for several years. That was one of my regrets. I virtually saw no British or Russian or French soldiers. No, I had nothing to do with them. My most vivid memory came on the first day of the new year of '45. It was a beautiful, bright day. What had happened before that was it was cloudy. The clouds were what they called on the deck, so we weren't flying. The Battle of the Bulge was going on. We were taking terrible beating in the Battle of the Bulge. In our fires, because the clouds were on the ground, they couldn't fly, they couldn't help, they just sat there wishing that the day would clear. Then on the first day of the new year, 45, it cleared up. So they were ready to take off. And that was quite a vivid day. Beautiful, beautiful day. And then I remember I was putting a fuse in the nose of a bomb on the underside of it. And all of a sudden, well, first of all, P-51s from the other side of the field, one of the P-51s was taking off and made an unusual amount of racket. I noticed what's going on. What he had done is to try to speed up and get up so that his wheels would come up, and then he could start to fire his guns. The guns would not fire as long as the wheels were down. And this plane was taking off, and it just got off the ground and started to fire. I thought something's going. He fired his gun, started firing, and then the bullets were all over the place. Tracer bullets and the German planes were coming in, the Messerschmitt 109s and the Focke-Wulfs, and all of a sudden the bullets were going all over the place. So I took that fuse that I had, put it in my tummy, and then went running for the nearest slit trench. There were already 4 guys in there, so I would be riding kind of top cover. So I kept going and found my own slit trench, and then I had to peek out, no matter how serious it is, you have to peek. So I peeked up out of the thing, and here comes a Messerschmitt 109 going, 300 miles an hour. He was right down on the deck, and he was going right by me, and I peeked out, and I got a good look at him. He had a old-fashioned leather flyer's cap on, and he had a red scarf on. He was the World War hero of the First World War. What was his name? I can't think of it. He was the Red Baron. That is, he was an imitation of the former pilot. And he was going so fast, right down on the ground, and there was a forest right here, and I thought, my God, he's going to run into the forest. He went boom, boom, boom. Boy, those airplanes were just beautiful planes. Me-109s. So that was a vivid memory, and I remember that such a clear picture. I wasn't scared. I was just excited. It was you're just too busy to be scared, I guess you might say. The Red Baron, that's who he was. That's a very pleasant memory. I wonder whatever became of that chap. He probably didn't survive. That was their last great sortie. After that, the Luftwaffe had so little gasoline that they couldn't come out in force anymore. First day. They took a terrible beating that day because at the end of the fracas, there were black plumes around the airport where planes had come in and smashed. And all of our planes came back, so all of those black plumes were German ships. It took that was their last day. It was quite exciting. That same day, I was going to mention, was exciting too, because a little later in the day, a British let me see, what were the British fighters? It was a British fighting plane, came in, and it was in distress, and it had to come in and land on our airfield, which was not its own. So it came in, and it was just starting to make its final run, and our P-51s from our base came roaring in behind it, and they apparently radioed to the English pilot, but he didn't respond. Maybe he didn't have a radio or it wasn't working. So our P-51 and these British planes looked just like the Messerschmitts from the rear. So this plane of ours came right down behind it and shot it down because he mistook it for a German ship. And that was a real tragedy, which you could see was going to happen. You could, I saw it, I said, oh my God, no, 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 because you knew that a mistake was going to be made. There were so many mistakes. That reminds me of the fact that when we were bombing right after D-Day, we were going in and bombing what we thought was the German territory, and a mistake was made there. We bombed some of our own people, which was, those terrible mistakes were made, you know. That day cleared, finally, and so our planes could take off with the Bulge. And they did wonderful work that day because they were good dive bombers, and they could spot the German tanks in and around the Bulge. And they really, that day, they really turned it around. The Germans were advancing quickly in the Battle of the Bulge, the Ardennen Forest. But that day turned it around because our boys and the other fighter pilots could spot the German tanks, and if they got anywhere near them, they would blow their tracks off. And so that turned the Battle of the Bulge around. And it was for the work that our outfit did at that time that the King of Belgium gave our unit a unit citation. I wear it with great pride on Memorial Day and our Armistice Day, the 11th of November, which is the armistice of the First World War. We remember it well, don't we? We were in southern England. Before the actual invasion, we got all ready to go. Our trucks were all waterproofed and everything. And then on one occasion, we got ready to go and we started to go. That was a fake. We didn't go. But one thing we learned from that first venture down toward southern England to get on the boat was that all of the exhaust pipes of all the trucks had been turned up so that when they splashed in the water, the water wouldn't go down the exhaust pipes of the trucks. But then on one of the early rehearsals, it started to rain, and the rain came down, and all the trucks started to sputter because the rain was getting into their exhaust. So then they realized that in case it rained when the real thing happened, they had to have a cover over the exhaust pipes. So that was a learning process which helped out. Fortunately, when we did go in June, it didn't rain. But all of the exhaust pipes were covered by that time. Yeah. We pushed up on the shore in the early evening. It was daylight till 11 o'clock then. Pushed up on the shore, and we just sat there. And I said, why don't we get off? Of course, it was busy. And so we just sat there, and then it got dark. And then the Heinkels, German bombers, came in. Did I tell you about that? We were sitting there in the dark, and I kept saying, why don't we get going? There was a ravine up ahead of us where we would be going up. We sat there in the dark, and then all of a sudden the Heinkels the German bombers started to come in, and there were hundreds of ships around us. All ships and flat barges had anti-aircraft guns on them. So when the Heinkels came in, seemed like 1,000 anti-aircraft guns were going all over us, and it formed, with the tracer bullets, it formed a great cathedral of light, maybe a half a mile high. It was almost a solid cathedral of light. And those Heinkel planes the bombers came right down through it, went on through, and we didn't hit a thing. A million shots in the air, and we didn't hit any of them. Those Heinkel pilots were lucky that day. And they dropped big anti-round floating bombs. that were used for ships would bump into them and blow up. They dropped those, and some of them went off on impacts. When they hit the water, they went off. And it was enough to break your head wide open. It was a terrible, terrible explosion. It was interesting. We were wide awake at that time. I had that sense, I'll say, about the first day of the new year, when it cleared up and our planes went to work on the Battle of the Bulge, and that was folding up. And of course, at that time, the Russians were, I don't know whether they were getting pretty close to Berlin by that time. So the eastern front of the German army was collapsing, and we knew that, so it was about over. Hitler was still alive, but it was about over. We realized that. Even in Italy, they were having to give up, although they fought on in Italy more easily because of the terrain. It was hard to advance in Italy because they were mountainous country. There were rivers like this, so our folks had to come down and get across the river with a whole lot of machine guns over on the other side. That was the toughest front of all. I'm glad I wasn't there. Well, VE Day and VJ Day were not particularly emotional because I knew it was over by that time. It was done, and we knew that. Homecoming was very pleasant, of course. I decided to, when I got back to New York, I decided to stay there and see a few shows and so forth, and then came home. I taught school at Edison High School, Edison Tech, one of the high schools. I taught algebra for for a semester, and I got a job teaching world history at Spencerport High School. And I was there for 3 years until I went out to Chicago. Oh, it's a wonderful university. And I studied modern European history there. And, well, I just enjoyed, I think mostly I would want to have stayed in the library my whole life. I just enjoyed going to school. You know, this was 3 years upon, after even a master's degree. I could have stayed there indefinitely, but it was time to move on, maybe get a job or something. So even though I failed my orals, I was through with it. That was it. Then I came back and got a regular job or two. I worked for quite a few years as an insurance adjuster for the Utica Mutual Insurance Company, which was an interesting job and a good company, Utica Mutual. I think they're out of business now. And I went through the southern tier, Warsaw, Perry, Nunde, and Dansville every week. And they had good agencies down there, and it was interesting work. That's when I became supervisor of the town of Pittsford. And I was there for 21 years. I was really at home there. I really enjoyed that job. And knew lots of people, and it was interesting. There's a lot you could do. People would walk into the office, and I made a practice of doing something for those people. And the staff on the town of Pittsford is good people. It was easy to work with. Oh no, didn't seem to have any. No, I don't know that it had been invented at that time. We have a lot more of it now. One of the reasons they have more of it now is because the wars are so ill-defined. You wonder whether Vietnam, why in the world would we ever go to Vietnam? Why would I want to give my life in Vietnam? That would make me a lot more nervous than what I knew had to be done. So there would be a lot of that. I've gone back to Normandy. Yeah, I went back on the anniversary. Let's see, what was it, '06? What was it, 50 years later? Yeah, I went back, had a nice tour, went up through France and saw some of the fields, and that was a nice, that was, what was that, 50 years later, yeah. Yeah, that was really worthwhile. I enjoyed that. And went on to Berlin and visited the city there, which was all rebuilt, of course, by that time. It's a big, interesting city. Is it? No, I had a few visits to London. It was interesting there because so many buildings and so many buildings were down. There's nothing but cellars there filled with bricks. And I do recall this. I noticed that they had special British teams that were assigned to finding the bombs in the rubble that didn't go off. No, I wouldn't want that occupation. They had to find those bombs and defuse them, and that, I think, would be a very dangerous. And I saw some of those fellows working, and I thought, my gosh, those fellows are real heroes. I don't think I would have the nerve to try to defuse, find the bombs and try to defuse them. I remember them. I have lots and lots of pictures taken during the war, hundreds of them, and I've kept them all. I've taken them to some of the reunions of the 366 Fighter Group, which is still extant. They're flying out of Idaho. But the modern, there are only one or two that still go back. The rest of them are gone. So when I go back to a reunion of the 366, they're all a lot younger, and I find they're not all interested. I took my pictures back, and they didn't bother to look at them. They weren't interested. They were interested in their combats, but not the old war. So I don't take the pictures. I don't go back anymore.